All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give it a few minutes as folks enter into the webinar. So welcome to our fourth Parent and Caregiver webinar at the Ackerman Institute. I'm so happy that you could join us. So I know we only have an hour and there's a lot of information to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get things underway. Just a couple notes. We are recording this webinar. You will not be on camera visually or audibly. So please don't worry about that. And if you do have questions, if you could write them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will be getting to those as much as we can. We'll also have some time at the end for questions. So I am very happy to introduce to everyone this morning Dr. Judy Grossman, who is the Associate Director of the Center for the Developing Child and Family. And she's also the director of the Children with Special Needs Project at the Ackerman Institute. And they also offer some parent workshops, which will be sometime this year. So please stay posted. But I'll just sort of hand it over to you, Judy.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, Helen. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for sharing this hour with me. I hope you get a lot out of it. Certainly gives you a chance to be a little reflective about what you've gone through. Excuse me. Sorry, this outside noise. So this workshop is going to have two sections. The first section is talking about what is resilience. It's sort of a buzz term now, and there's really a science behind it. So we want to talk about that. And then the second part is helping you come up with strategies that can work for you, your family, your child, so that you can build more resilience. And there's no question what we've all gone through the past year and a half has tested us. So let me pull up my, excuse me, my PowerPoint. Okay. So the first question is, what is resilience? And the definition that I like is struggling well, because there's no denying that sometimes we go through difficult periods, or sometimes our life runs rather smoothly, but I don't think there is anyone that gets through without some troubling times, or at least times that demand more of us. So I'm going to start by asking a question, and I hope through this hour, you really do try to be reflective and apply the information to yourself and to your children. So my question to you is, in general, how resilient do you feel? Do you consider yourself a very resilient person, moderately resilient? Just take a second. And again, we're going to do this self-reflection a number of times. So if you want some paper and pencil, that would be great. So there's a scale. And I'm going to start by saying this was a very unfair question, because there's not a resilience gene. We are not resilient or not resilient. We're a little resilient. We're resilient depending on the situation, depending on the supports that we have. We may be very resilient in dealing with a crisis, let's say flooding or a death in the family, and not resilient in disappointments in relationships. So it is situation specific. A couple of other ways to define it, because you'll see that there's definitely commonalities. adaptive responses in the face of adversity or challenges, recovering quickly, adjusting to change. But the reason I highlighted stress is because it really all comes down to what we as stress researchers have learned over the past 4 decades, at least. And so we're going to talk a lot about stress this morning. So if resilience is not a trait, but it's something that we can learn, and it actually is like a muscle. And as we do the second part of the workshop, I'm going to give you specific examples of how to build resilience. But every time we have a successful experience, or every time we can handle a difficult situation, or every time we go out of our comfort zone and come out thinking positively about how we've handled it, that builds resilience. So it's really an interaction of your genes, your DNA, your experience. And since this is a parenting workshop, we're really going to focus on the quality of parenting. So the quality of parenting has a lot to do with building resilience. And one of the things we know is that your DNA is not your destiny. A very short explanation is that genes are turned on and off. It's called gene expression. So that the quality of experience, the home environment, and the larger context, the lifestyle of the family, if you live in a toxic environment, all of these factors influence your gene expression. So we used to think, oh, well, our genes determine everything. But in fact, your genes determine much less than we think. And so coming back to this, we build resilience through experience of success. And each time we have a success, we feel greater mastery. Oh, I can deal with this. I can get through this. I can handle it. I can control this. But then we also, and some people more than others, carry negative limiting core beliefs. And the belief might be, this is too much for me. I can't handle this. I'm never good enough. I'm not smart enough to deal with this. And these core beliefs, these negative beliefs that we begin to integrate about ourselves, have a lot to do with our motivation to change, with our grit, which I'll talk about later. And if we think about our children for a minute, I mean, how many of you can think of things that your child has said where I'm not smart enough, or they don't like me, or I'm not a good child, I'm not a good boy. Unfortunately, I've heard that all too often in my project with children with special needs, where they may be misunderstood, or they're striving and they're bright, but they can't accomplish as much as the other children. And the way they make sense of it is to say, I'm not good. Or children that have a lot of tantrums, or a lot of meltdowns, which no child wants, but some children don't have good self-regulation. And they know their parent gets very upset. They sometimes internalize it as, I'm a bad boy, I'm a bad girl. So what have we been dealing with? I mean, one of the things about stress is it's not a particular stressor that determines the outcome. It's the pileup or the accumulation of stressors. So, COVID, for those that are in the audience today, for some people, it was a much greater stressor because of illness and even death in the family. But for everyone, there was the lockdown, remote school, isolation, certainly increased demands for parents. I mean, you were the parent, and you were the teacher, and the gym teacher, and the cook, and the the friend and the wife and, just and the worker, those parents that were working full time and having their child home full time. I have to say that when I've had sessions with parents, either through my practice or doing online workshops, I am amazed at the family's resilience and how families, not to say they haven't suffered and not to say we don't feel drained and we don't feel still insecure and anxious, but I have been quite amazed by the degree of resilience. And on top of that, for some family, it's financial insecurity, housing instability, eviction, climate change, depending on where you live in the country, but that is something that is certainly making people anxious about the future. Political differences, racial unrest. I mean, if I am a very mature person, so to speak, the way of saying it is I'm older, and I have never in my life experienced so much strain and discomfort and uncertainty as we have now. So you might have other things to add to the list. If you do, that would be great, and maybe you can share that later. What have been the intra-family effects of the pandemic? And not just the pandemic, it's that aggregate of variables that I just talked about. Well, a lot of families, they've seen child regression, mommy, I want to sleep with you, more challenging behavior, an increase in sibling conflict, certainly academic lag, and a lot of screen dependence, call it addiction, call it overuse, but this whole topic of screen use was a very big issue before the pandemic and certainly more so now. And anxiety, and anxiety in children doesn't present as anxiety. It presents as anger, it presents as the child wanting to isolate, being disruptive, cursing. So one of the things that I'd like you to think about during this hour is when your child is stressed, what behaviors are you seeing? Because the behavior is really a cover-up for what's underneath: worry, fear, lack of sense of safety. For adults, we know that there have been increases in all of the, let's say, less desirable outcomes or maladaptive outcomes. So I'm not going to give you the rates, but the rates have gone up in anxiety, depression, alcohol consumption, drug use, domestic violence, child abuse, suicide. All of these maladaptive outcomes are the result of this sense of uncertainty and anxiety. And this is how people cope. Call this maladaptive coping. So later in the hour, we're going to talk about adaptive coping. And then in terms of family relationships, this 24/7 situation that we went through has caused more interpersonal conflict. Now, it doesn't mean to say in some families there's a renewed sense of community in the family and bonding and good times together that have created more of a sense of family identity. But in addition, there's been more interpersonal conflict, more arguments, maybe lack of patience. If you think about all the demands that you've had and how you've handled that, maybe you've been less patient, more frustrated, and poor self-regulation. So self-regulation, the ability to self-calm, is a big piece of what we're going to talk about in the second half. So I mentioned that there's a science behind resilience. And it really goes back to stress research in the 70s, 80s, and continuing. And at first, we just looked at risk factors. If you're living in poverty and you're a single parent and you don't have any support and so forth and so on. And then we started looking at, but what about people that do well when they face a lot of stress? So we looked at protective factors, and we're going to look at that together. And then we started looking at the neuroscience, because we have the ability now to look at brain function. So there is a relationship between stress, the quality of parenting, and child development. So think about yourself for a minute, okay? This is another self-reflection question. How do you behave when you feel stressed? So maybe close your eyes or just think for a minute. So, or think of a particular time when you felt very, very stressed, particular situation, where you were, who you were with, and how did you react? So I have two examples here. Here, the mother is very angry. Some people get angry, some people get irritated, some people get loud. And here, this mom, I don't know, she looks sad. She looks like she's practically giving up. She's certainly more withdrawn. So how do you behave when you feel stressed? And even more so, do you know when you're stressed? A lot of people, surprisingly, are not aware that the way that they're behaving is triggered by stress. So for some people, they have a lot of body signals, they have muscle tension, they may have stomach upset, they might bite their nails, their heart might race, so they have bodily signals. Some people, as I mentioned, have certain feelings. So a parent might be preoccupied, so they're not present for the child. They might be feeling withdrawn and distant. They might be feeling, as a result of stress, frightened. So we have feelings. What are our thoughts in response to stress? Well, think about yourself. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. Do you have negative self-talk? I never get it right. This isn't going to turn out well. That's one thought. Another thought might be, well, other parents can do it. I don't know why I can't. You're comparing all the time. Another thought might be, that you only focus on the negative rather than focusing on your accomplishments and your strengths. And everything that I say, as I tell you to self-reflect, I want you to think about your child or your children. So one of the things that we know, going back to stress research, is that we have a negativity bias, that we are oriented towards the negative. And that goes back to early times and survival. And we had to be looking out for danger. But we don't need to do that today, certainly not in the same way. So they say that negativity is like Velcro, it sticks to you. Whereas positive thoughts are like, what's the term? They slide off you. They're like Teflon, right? So we have to always be thinking about not just strengths in terms of, he's really great at soccer, but what about character traits? What about gratitude? What about all the things that you have accomplished and hope to accomplish? And then there's the behavior. How do you act in response to stress? So again, we're going to talk about that when we talk about coping. If we start with, do you have any maladaptive ways that you deal with stress? We named some, or I named some. Some people eat too much. Some people don't eat. Some people sleep too much. Some people start gambling. As I mentioned before, drinking too much and so forth. So I want you to think about, again, how do you know when your child is stressed? What are the signals? So don't just look at the surface behavior. What is underneath the behavior? The behavior is telling us a story. And what about your partner, your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend? When they're triggered, how do they react to stress? If you're seeing that your partner gets angry easily, is there something underneath the anger? Is there too much stress at work that's being spilled over to home life? You know, let's go a little deeper. So we know that when parents are stressed, it can affect the quality of parenting, right? But we also know that it's the parent's job to buffer the child from stress. And as the child and the teenager gets older, you not only buffer, but you help them develop their coping and self-regulation skills. The brain research tells us that cumulative, meaning, that list that we just went through of all of those stressors, from the pandemic to intrafamilial stressors to maybe having to move, school opening and closing. That and toxic stress affects the structure and the function of the child's developing brain. So there's a lot of neuroscience that is telling us that it is very important, certainly early in life, for those of you that have young children, but throughout life, to realize that there is an impact, so that when someone is under ongoing stress, their stress response system is working overtime. And so they're releasing adrenaline and cortisol. Those things lead to inflammation, and it leads to all kinds of physical and mental health outcomes. And so, I don't want to go into detail, but it also affects interconnection between cells, the size of some of the hippocampus and the amygdala, different areas of the brain. So these can have lifelong consequences. And the more the parent can buffer the child, not to eliminate all stress, because we do need stress in our life. Tolerable stress helps us grow, helps us learn, helps us be motivated. It's when there is too much or ongoing or toxic. And I'm going to explain what toxic stress means in a second. So, as I said, there are lifelong consequences for learning, behavior, physical, and mental health. So when someone is in a constant stress response, what happens is over time, it's harder for them to go back to baseline. If you're in a situation, maybe someone's walking behind you in a dark street and you feel scared, like, am I safe? What's going on? When the incident is over, you return to baseline, right? But if you're in a situation where parents are always arguing and the parents are very anxious and, there's just a lot of turmoil and the child hears unrest outside their window, those are things that trigger the stress response. So it's harder to turn to baseline, but also the child or the individual is more quick to go into a stress response. So the bottom line, having said all that, is you want to buffer your child from stress, and you want to help your child develop the coping strategies, because this does have lifelong consequences. There was something called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. I'm not going to go into the whole study, but when people talk about toxic stress, they're talking about 10 particular situations: abuse, physical, emotional, sexual neglect, and someone in the family with mental illness, if there's domestic violence, alcohol or substance abuse, divorce, or someone that's incarcerated. So this study of over 17,000 people, of which 2/3 were college educated and white, so this is not an impoverished population, the percent of individuals that experienced at least one of these toxic stressors was a quarter, 25%. And 15% of the population, which is an enormous number, experienced 3 or more. So when we talk about toxic stress, the question that they ask is, before age 18, did you, and they define each of these, and it's a number from 1 to 10, and the higher the number is, the more physical illness, obesity, heart disease, cancer, all kinds of physical disease, depression, anxiety, PTSD, behavior that leads to negative outcomes, and productivity and life potential in terms of earning a living. So another way to think about stress, and we're completing this section, we're going to move into, okay, Judy, I feel stressed. What should I do? Is it's important to be very specific about what is stressing you, or what is bothering you, or from the long list of areas of uncertainty that we're experiencing, what is most stressful for you. One of the ways that you can do it, and there are many ways, is to think about different roles. So, am I extremely stressed in the parent role, but work's not that stressful, and getting things done at home is not that bad. My husband and my wife and I are getting along. I do have a family member that has long COVID. So it's one way to think about stress in your life. Another way is to look at, and again, this is a little bit related to roles, where is it coming from? Are you just an anxious person? Anxiety runs in families. Anxiety is catching. If you're very anxious, your child knows. Children are acutely attuned to their parents' state of mind, and certainly their emotional state. And then there are different kinds of stress. So you might have experienced some stressful life events. You had to be hospitalized, getting divorced, having a baby. They don't have to be negative, but they demand change. Daily hassles. So I know the families that I worked with remotely during lockdown, having multiple children on multiple screens, and you're trying to do your work, and just a lot of hassles. And it sounds silly, well, why is that important? But it's the accumulation. So think of yourself, if you have one of those days where everything goes wrong, it wasn't anything so significant, but by the end of the day, you're exhausted. Do you have the energy to be the best parent you can be? Chronic stress are those things that are ongoing. Someone with a chronic health problem, someone with a developmental disability, being in poor housing, on and on. And then we already talked about stress. So one of the last things I want you to think about in terms of our discussion about resilience and stress is, can you control it? Because there are some things that we can control and some things that we can't. We can't control mutations in the variant. We can't control the spread of the virus, but we can control our reaction to it, our protection, wearing masks, social distance, and so forth, getting vaccinated, right? So to put your effort into things that you can't control is really going to wear you down. So as we think about what can you do to build resilience, you want to think about those areas where you do have some control. Is the situation predictable and is it important? Okay. So last self-reflection, and then we're moving into building resilience. Think about something this month, the month of September, that's had you anxious, upset, stressed, worried, concerned. Just think about one thing. Okay, write it down. Now, I want you to think about your most effective way that you cope when you feel stressed. Okay? So people cope in many, many different ways. Write down how you cope. And it might be more than one particular coping mechanism, coping strategy. You know, you might have, hopefully, you have a number of different coping strategies. So have that handy. And now we're going to talk about building resilience. Because remember, it's like a muscle. You can build it over time. You can help your child to build his own sense of resilience. So remember I mentioned protective factors. So if you think about a seesaw, okay, you have all these stressors, you know, all these things that are creating discomfort, uneasiness, fear, that are having demands on you in terms of your ability to function. And then we have protective factors. So the most important one, without doubt, and this is demonstrated universally through the literature, is social support. So one of the things that we've been looking at lately is the meaning of connection and how connection, we're built in for connection. Our neurobiology is based on the need for connection. Those of you that ever went on a safari, it's fascinating to see the animal world and how they run in herds, or the mother takes care of the baby. But we all know that social support's important. Self-awareness is a protective factor so that before you act, you think, right? Something happens and you take a minute and you think, and that thought makes you feel a certain way, and then you behave, right? So we're focusing on this every time I ask you to take a moment for self-reflection. Emotional intelligence. I've been working on a presentation to a particular group, and I've been looking at the emotional literacy literature. And, you know, there's a lot of research, I would say, the past 2 decades on the importance of knowing how you feel, being able to label it. I'm so sorry about the noise outside. Being able to manage it, that is as important, if not more important, than learning to read and write, okay? So I'm going to talk about that more towards the end, but emotional intelligence, helping your child to recognize how he feels, to then recognize how other people feel and to be able to self-calm when he's having or she's having big feelings is a protective factor. Coping, we're going to talk about, and executive function skills. So this is such a big topic, I'm not really going to be able to address it, but executive function skills are the last area of the brain to develop, the prefrontal cortex, and it has to do with being organized, time management, goal setting, making decisions, all of the higher order thinking. Oops. Okay, so we talked about maladaptive coping, and now we're going to talk about adaptive coping. And you came up with your list of how you cope. I think it's helpful to think about the different categories, okay? One of the things that we neglect as part of that list is the importance of physical health. So if you're fatigued or your child is fatigued, are you not more reactive, right? If you have poor nutrition, if you don't get enough exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, are you not less patient? Relaxation activity, what do you do to just sort of, for recreational activity? I do yoga, I read, I call my sister, which is support. But there are things I do, pottery. What do you do? What do you do to relax? Are these isolated activities or are these activities you do with other people? Change your behavior. So that might mean that you prioritize. You set goals that are achievable. One of the ways parents can be very helpful to children is to help them set a reasonable, manageable, short-term goal where you're pretty sure there can be some success, and that'll help your child build resilience, changing your thoughts and getting support. So let's look a little bit more specifically, okay? So behavioral and emotional regulation means being able to regulate your feelings, big feelings, when you're very sad, when you're very angry, when you're very anxious. And behavioral self-regulation means being able to pay attention, right? So for a child to be able to learn, they have to be focused, so they can't be over-aroused or under-aroused. So I talk about arousal level. If the child is very extremely active, and one boy I worked with said he was extra bubbly. But when he was extra bubbly, he couldn't sit still and he couldn't do his homework and he couldn't pay attention. So his arousal was too high. And some people, their arousal is very low and, they look disinterested, or the child might look bored, or, they just seem distracted. And so they're not in the right place for optimal learning. They need to be focused. So how do we regulate this arousal level? Well, one is through sensory motor activities. And for these activities that are bodily oriented, it's good to think about activities that give the child resistance. So yoga or resistance activities like a push-up bar, or anything pushing and pulling, because that gives sensory input into the body and that helps regulate the nervous system. Swinging, for some children, swinging can be self-regulating. All kinds of movement. The research tells us, particularly for your child, the most important is aerobic activity. So if your child is doing homework and they're getting frustrated and they want to give up, do a few jumping jacks, take a movement break, do something fun and silly, do shaking. That will help to regulate the system again. The obstacle course or red light, green light, anything in movement where there's start and stop. Okay, so I might be doing a session with a child and they have to follow what I do. And can they stop and then start? Mindfulness activities, extremely helpful. Could be breathing, progressive relaxation, body scan. I find that some young children, they just don't get the breathing, blow out the candle, blow out the flower. Some children get it, some don't. I find that what works more easily with children or teenagers that have difficulty just sort of being calm and focusing on the breath is progressive relaxation, where you tense a muscle group and relax it. Because there your mind is on the body part that you're tensing, and it's a little easier to pay attention. Or body scan. I mean, they're wonderful materials that you can get on the internet for children to do these activities and for you to do them. Do it with your child. And self-soothing activities. So for you or your child, let's say your child's very upset and are moving down to this chill out area, and the child is getting aroused and you can tell, it's not going in a good direction and they're going to get really upset and fall apart. So as they're getting aroused or as they're getting angry or as they're getting upset, you want to give an option at that point. Time for a chill out space. Why don't you go into your chill out area? And what should the child do there? Well, whatever soothes them. With young children, sometimes having a special area in the bedroom or in the apartment or in the home with, maybe beanbag chair or even making a tent, anything that's self-contained. They might like fidget items, heavy weights, lots of blankets, listening to music. This is being a detective and knowing your child. And of course, as the child gets older, it'll be more clear to both you and the child, a teenager, the things that they can do to calm. So I'm not a big fan of timeout, mostly because it never worked for me with my children. And that's why, chill out is really teaching the child self-regulation. Timeout, I don't know what it's teaching. You always want to say, what am I teaching my child? I mean, really, parenting is about guiding and teaching. It's not about punishing and discipline, although there are times when you do need to discipline a child and possibly take some things away or have them spend some time in their room. Another coping strategy is problem solving. Now, you don't do it in the moment, but let's say the siblings are fighting and one hits the other. Punch in the eye, right? Well, certainly there's a consequence for that. So let's say the child had to go and calm down and then apologize, but you want to rewind and say, well, why were you getting so angry? What was she doing? Oh, I see. And I'm doing emotional coaching. Oh, well, I could understand that made you angry. You're validating how the child feels, but you cannot hit her. So let's rewind. What could you have done instead? Let's just think about what happened a little while ago. What else could you do? Positive self-talk. So a coping strategy might be when the child, hey, let's look at this child here that's saying help. Either he's frustrated because he can't do it, or it's taking too long, or he's just not in the mood to do the homework. He wants the parent to help him do it. Stop And what's the story? Let's change the story. Talk to the child, what's going on? What's making it hard? Let's do some problem solving and think about, how you can get through these assignments. And, when you say to yourself, what are you saying to yourself now? And how can we change that story? Most importantly, parents model self-calming techniques. So if you're having a situation with your child where they're being difficult in any way, and you're getting more and more upset, and you've asked the child 10 times to do something, which in itself is a problem, and you're feeling some tension in your body, and you know that you're going to start yelling, and you're going to start yelling louder and louder. In the moment, could you say to your child, I see that I'm getting really upset, and I don't want to keep yelling because that doesn't help. So I'm going to take my 3 breaths because that helps me. So you're modeling, you're coaching, because if you can't stay regulated, your child's not going to be regulated. Young children need co-regulation. They need the parent to help them stay regulated. So before I have some summary slides, again, self-reflection. What do you learn about yourself that can help you deal with adversity in the future? Hopefully, the state of the world and this collective trauma won't happen again, but there is a probability that it will, or it will look different. What have you learned about yourself in the past 1.5 years, 2 years? Write down your thoughts. What did you learn about your child that can help you promote his or her resilience when things are difficult? What have you noticed about your child, particularly during lockdown, where you were able to observe members of your family 24/7 and saw how people dealt with increased demands, with dealing with uncertainty? Answer these 2 questions. Because one of the things that I have learned over and over again is that we all experience challenges, and we hope to be resilient. And if we feel, oh, gee, I've come through this pretty well, I learned some things about myself, and I learned that I can't control everything. I have to sort of go with the flow more. That leads to personal transformation. Another term is post-traumatic growth. So this is a very positive trajectory. And there's no reason why, if you're thoughtful and if you start building skills, coping skills, skills for mastery, you can't come to a place where you appreciate your resilience and there's opportunity for self-transformation. So you don't have to be a superwoman or a superman. In fact, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a super parent. We all do the best we can, right? We all care. We all love our children, and we do the best we can. So to summarize, and then we'll have time for questions, get informed, okay? Know the facts, not just about the pandemic, but know the facts about the demands from school. If your child is saying, now that they're back in school full-time, in a different way, they may still feel anxious or uncomfortable. How is the child acting in school? Child comes home and says, I hate school, I hate school. Well, how is the child acting in that context? I have no friends, I have no friends. Well, ask the teacher. Utilize social support, coping, focus on strengths, try to have reasonable goals that you can attain. Have the child and yourself, and this is something that was demanded of us, to have grit, to stay with it, to have persistence, to celebrate effort and small victories. So if you want to help your child build resilience, you want to mention effort, right? Effort is a more important focus than the outcome. Use everyday challenges as teachable moments, okay? So really build that feeling of vocabulary in your family. I'm feeling exasperated. Depending on the age of the child, the language becomes more and more sophisticated. I'm jealous. Gee, I'm wondering if you're feeling competitive because you haven't really played with these children for a long time, and now you're playing the game again together. Be reflective and flexible. Okay, being rigid in times of stress is often counterproductive, and we need to make adaptations. Very importantly, instead of reacting, especially when you're triggered by someone in your family, pause, take a breath, and respond. Such a difference. Such a difference. Establish routines that are predictable. So you want routines, you want consistency, but you also have to allow for flexibility. Create a sense of safety. Does your child feel safe right now? Did your child feel safe after 9/11? Does your child feel safe walking to school? Is your child afraid of climate change and what's going to happen to their home? Spend quality time with each child and be present. Now, what do I mean by be present? How many parents are constantly on their screens, on their phones, talking to their child, multitasking? To be present is a gift for your child. So when you are interacting, be totally present. And that teaches the child to be present, to put the screens aside and have an interpersonal connection. Have family time, fun, pay attention to the co-parenting marital relationship. Have some self-compassion for yourself. This has not been easy. Take care of yourself. And the bottom line is, it all comes down to relationships and connection. Whatever is going on, the most important thing in terms of you and your child is to be connected. Not to be busy with the doing, but to leave time for being together, enjoying one another. Try to be comfortable with uncertainty because it's here. It's not going away. Identify what you can and cannot control and finding joy in everyday experiences. So what we've just gone through is multiple crises, ongoing chronic strain, and opportunity to grow and learn about ourselves and learn about our children. So Helen or I think someone is going to help with questions and answers.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you so much. Just one quick question from someone wondering if everybody will receive your slides.
They can certainly be sent out, absolutely.
Great, yes, so we will send that out. There's also just a reflection from earlier. In my experience, the quarantine has brought some opportunities for improvement, sharing of parental functions, more conversation, and more profound relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope the takeaway is not just the negative about the impact of stress, but there have been some wonderful developments in families in terms of finding new ways to spend time together and, really making time for family time. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I hope in that reflection question towards the end, what did you learn? I would hope that that list has a lot of positives.
Mhm. Wonderful. So please feel free to enter in any questions you have in the Q&A. There's another question here. What questions are left to be asked regarding resilience?
The question is, what questions are left to be asked?
Regarding resilience.
Okay, I don't quite understand the question, but I can create an answer.
Okay.
Great. This focus on, if you read anything, everything is about resilience now. Resilience in the workplace, resilience at home, resilience at school. Like I said at the beginning, it's a buzz term, but there is a science behind it. And I think what we're learning is the importance of practice and the importance of opportunity to see ourselves differently as someone who can handle a difficult situation. When we went into positive and negative beliefs, really that's the foundation for change, is your belief that, I'm capable of handling this and I feel worn out and this is too much for me, but I know I'll get through it. You really have to start there because resilience is built on a foundation of believing that you're capable of growth and change. And everything that I say applies to your child as well.
Yes. So we also have a comment. If stress, or a question, if stress is our body's response to an emotion that can be positive or negative, how do you understand that the negative one can be so hard most of the time to endure?
Well, it all comes down to biology. So the negative ones affect our bodily functions and they affect our hormones. They bring us into a stress response. I'll talk about positive feelings because they also have a effect on our body in terms of releasing oxytocin and some of the feel-good hormones. So it's not just that negative feelings affect our bodily function. All feelings affect our bodily function. It's just that the negative effects can be long-lasting if the stress is enduring and if the stress is relentless, right? So the reason we focus on the negative consequences, and there are researchers looking at the positive, much more focus on oxytocin, which is what women release after they have a baby. But the reason that there's so much focus on the effects of the stress response on the body is because they've done this long study with the 17,000 plus people, and they've seen that the stress response over time leads to a lot of physical health conditions. And that is why more interest is being put in to looking at the effects of stress on human functioning, because I hate to say it, but physical medicine takes precedence over mental health and education. And medicine is the driver. And now that they've found health consequences related to people experiencing a lot of stress, there's much more emphasis across the board on looking at resilience, which is how we manage difficult situations.
Thank you. So we are about out of time, but I do want to just get to one more question. So how do you build resilience for a teen who has increased social anxiety due to the pandemic, who is reluctant to take the social initiatives that could build confidence?
Okay, I do think pacing is important. Some children, return to life as it was. Of course, it's not the same. And quite a few children have social anxiety. The best you can do in the moment is to recognize it, accept it, and validate it. I understand how you feel. You're not the only one that feels that way. It feels awkward, it feels uncomfortable. For me, sometimes I worry. This is the parent talking. For me, sometimes I worry when I go someplace and it's crowded. And it's pacing. You gently insert your belief in your child that he will be able to enter these social situations more easily over time. But, it's like a child in the playground that doesn't want to go and play with the other children until they feel comfortable. You don't want the parent to push the child and say, go and play with the other kids, go and play with the other kids. For that child, it may take time. For the teenager, it might take time, but there should be no shame or no judgment around how a child feels, and just believe in the child. And it will change, but it will take time.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what to say to a child when in a place where there are people shouting and or looking scary to the child? So I guess public places, subways, walking in the streets in the city, where maybe the environment sounds like is feel threatening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are two parts to that. The first part is, again, accepting how the child feels. And, the child might not even have the word for it. So you might say, I'm wondering if you're scared because, that guy looks a little strange, or I see you looking over there and there's that group of people. I'm wondering if you're a little scared. I understand that. Okay, so one part is the emotional coaching, validate how the child feels, and then make a point that you will keep the child safe. Okay, I am here. My job is to keep you safe, and I will always be doing that for you. And, sometimes we worry about things that look different, or we don't know what's going to happen then, and that is scary. But I'm here with you, and I will keep you safe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Judy. I'm seeing a lot of comments, just thanking you for the presentation. I think this was much needed for everyone here. So we will send the slides out to everyone. We'll also, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. So we'll also send out the link when we have that up. But yeah, this was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So lots of gratitude for you in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And,
yes.
Let's look at that trajectory moving towards transformation.
Yes, absolutely.